Welcome back to Dagryffyn Hobby. My name's Dave. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at the 2243. Actually, this is the 2243 that I've had for quite some time. The one I just bought has already been taken apart. I started running it and it ran nice and smooth, but would then stop and wouldn't go either direction, even though it seemed like the E-unit was working. So when I opened it up, I found that the E-unit itself was very loose. A repair had obviously been attempted previously and it just wasn't doing the job. In this video, I open up the engine, remove all the parts, clean, lube, and repair whatever needs attention. .2243. Took it all apart. The frame looks like it's in pretty good shape. I might just clean that up and use it as is. The front truck I had to cut off. I couldn't unscrew it because the screw that went through the top was seized in there, wouldn't come out. So I cut the screw head off and then kind of ground that down to be more or less flat. It still fits in, unless I come up with another idea. I'll probably drill a little hole in the middle there and tap it so that I can put a small screw in there to hold it in place when I'm done. The only real damage I'm seeing to this is this wheel looks a little bit out of whack, and this side of the frame is bent. The motor truck, I guess somebody had been in there and cleaned it. They used what I'm assuming is the red and tacky, which I know a lot of people like, but I'd rather go with something a lot thinner. So you can see how that red and tacky is just kind of stuck to the outside now. So I'll clean it all out and re-lube it. I took this apart not because the motor needed work, but because it was very greasy in a lot of places. See how dirty this is? Also, somebody had worked on the E-unit and it just was not cycling or grounding properly. So I tried to snap it all back together and get it to work, but it just wasn't working. So I don't know if one of the little fingers in there is bent and not making contact. I'll have to take a closer look. When servicing this power truck, you remove this screw and then this whole piece lifts off. So you can see how gunked up that all is. So I'm going to clean that up. But they really didn't get all the junk out of it. This has got fibers and chunks, hairs or something. So you really want to try to clean that all out. So on this power truck, you can pull this center piece out. I would say try to keep it together. This is a lot of goo in here. So I mean, it was running and it ran smooth. So it's not horrible. When the grease and whatnot starts to get thick and picks up the dirt, that's when it's going to start wearing out your gears. Look at that. That is not what you want in there. Oh, there's some more. That is messy. So this is sticky and stiff. All that's going to add to rolling resistance. So I'm going to take that one off. I can clean it up. I hope I haven't missed too much. I keep realizing I'm not holding this under the camera. Focused on what I'm doing. Sometimes it's hard to, well, all the time, it's hard to focus on what I'm doing and on the recording part of it. I've gotten through entire repair projects and then realized I couldn't see any of it on the camera. Well, I'm glad I took it apart. Look at this. You don't want that in your motor. Now, I used to clean things like this with WD-40. You end up leaving a sticky residue on things after a while. What I'm using now is this Inox MX3 original formula multi-purpose lubricant. I like using that because I feel like the lubricant gets in there and helps carry the junk out, but also leaves behind, you know, a nicely cleaned and smoothed and lubricated surface. Now, you might not want to get this on your hands. I don't really know. You might want to wear gloves when you do this. Unfortunately, I'm used to getting all sorts of chemicals on my hands, so it really doesn't bother me that much. Until I start getting some sort of contact dermatitis from it, then I tend to wear gloves more often. So I'm just using very light pressure to try to clear off the junk. I don't want to break or scratch or damage anything. If you don't want to take the time to go in between all the teeth with a screwdriver point or a pick or something, I mean, you could scrub it with a toothbrush. That usually does a pretty good job. So I've been spraying this with oil and blowing it out with a little bit of compressed air, trying to get the junk out, and I just keep getting more and more and more. So at this point, I feel like I've gotten as much as I'm going to get out. So I used some Labelle on the axles to hopefully get in there and help keep that lubricated inside. And then I'm just going to continue kind of trying to dry it off. The wheels are much cleaner than they were. It doesn't matter how clean you get it, it will still be dirty. I'm not going to eat off the thing, I just want it to run better. The inside of the wheel. It's just going to keep oozing out of there. I feel like if you've gotten to the point where you can roll this back and forth without leaving dirty tracks, that you're probably clean enough. I mean, that is worlds cleaner than it was. Everything's turning pretty freely. Seems pretty clean. I am going to put the 106 grease in there, if I have any left in here. This is decently cleaned up. That's pretty clean and lubricated and ready to put back together. For the front truck, it doesn't come apart easily. It's all kind of pressed together. So I'll use the old WD-40 on a toothbrush. Just kind of scrub it up. Give the frame just a wipe down. I didn't give it a very good wipe down. Just wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. A little bit of corrosion on there. So I gave the frame a very poor wipe down. It's good enough. I figure if I paint it, it's going to really stand out that I did. I realized that the one step is broken off. Well, maybe at some point I'll replace that. I cleaned up both trucks, and now it would be time to move on to the motor and the E-unit, which I forgot to look at the roller pickup. This thing could probably use new rollers, but I'm not going to worry about that now. But what I am going to do is take care of that solder point, because as you can see, it snapped off. A lot of the solder joints in this engine look like that, so I'm going to have to redo it all and hopefully do a better job. It's really quite an interesting groove. I wonder if that is from Super O. Super O has that real narrow center rail, I believe. Alright, I screwed that back onto the truck for now, just so I don't lose it. I'll remove it again to clean up that solder point when I'm ready to do the wiring. This is an E-unit jig from PE Design and Manufacturing. It holds the E-unit in place, and then this snaps onto the drum. Place it between the two pieces there. See where it rests. And then tighten the thumb screw to hold it in place. And then tighten the thumb screw on the bottom to hold the E-unit in place. Now the thing that holds the E-unit together is this post through the middle. So you can take this breaker bar here, put it in between the two sides, and press, and it comes apart. Now you might have noticed that came apart really easy, which is part of the problem with this engine, because when I took it apart the first time, the E-unit was loose like it is right now. So I'm going to take it all apart, and I'm going to check out these fingers here, because I don't think they were touching. They're a little deformed. At this point, you can loosen this thumb screw, pull it up a little bit so that it pulls the plunger up. Take this little guy and stick it in the side, and then that keeps this from going all the way down and grabbing on. So at this point, I'm just going to leave this in here because it's clean. I don't need to do anything with it. I'm going to pull the plunger out. I'm going to inspect the fingers, and it looks like this one here is deformed and bent out of the way. That might be why, once I put it back together, that it wasn't working. So I'm going to bend that up a little bit, and then realize the tool I need is in my toolbox at work. So I'm going to use this really oversized pair of pliers. Grab the tip, try to bend it down a little bit. Other than that, you want to make sure there are no burn marks on these fingers, and you want to make sure the fingers are not pushed down too much, because then they won't make contact with the drum. And they're all more or less even at this point. So I'm going to leave that be, the piston, put it back in place. Actually, I'm going to put this little guy in there first. Sometimes you have to wiggle it around until it sits right. Try to line everything back up. So everything looks better. This finger here still really isn't the best. Can't do much with it without doing more damage at this point. So I'm just going to make sure it's bent towards the drum enough that it will put tension on it. So since the drum is still in the arm here, you just want to make sure that your gear teeth are going the right way, so that when the piston gets pulled up, it grabs these teeth and rotates it. Very easy to accidentally put this drum in the wrong way, even when you've done it a bunch of times. So you want to line it up with this one side and then screw that back down, and we'll kind of hold it in place. because that's one of the most frustrating things about servicing the E-unit is keeping that drum in place. If we look at these fingers here, this one is bent out of whack. I'm just going to make sure they're bent back up and as straight as possible. All these little pieces are just so easy to damage. Then the trick is just kind of trying to line everything back up so you can snap it back together. That's back together. I can loosen the thumb screw. Whenever you remove this arm, make sure you're squeezing the sides of the E-unit so you don't yank the drum out, because I have done that. And make sure that the piston goes up easily, up and down, and that the drum turns. You will find sometimes deformation in the plastic on the edge of the drum, and it causes a little friction here and doesn't turn very easily. Now, you don't have to, but you can if you want. If you have one that's not moving as smoothly as you like, put a very little bit of lube on there. Very little bit. You don't want it seeping into the E-unit and getting onto the contacts. I put a little bit on, then I wipe off the excess. And I can tell that that is spinning better than it was a minute ago. That is serviced again. Hopefully it's enough to make it work. This is definitely easier to do with the wires removed, but I don't feel like desoldering it if I don't have to. I wasn't going to take it off, but I could use a cleaning. And the brushes, even though they are newer, are a little sticky. There's plenty of different opinions on what to do to clean the armature, but I just usually am going for a quick cleaning with a Q-tip, and that usually does it for me. And then just making sure that there's not too much junk in these crevices here. I'm going to put a drop of oil there on the shaft. Clean up the brush plate a little bit. All that dirt on the brush is going to definitely get in the way of good conductivity. Now, as long as these move in the brush plate, then I'm going to consider it good enough. If I can get them in there. You want to make sure that when you put them in, if you push them up, that they come right back out. I was about to give up. I was pushing that brush in and it slipped and shot out, and I was like, I'm never going to find that, but I found it. You just need it to sit there long enough to get both of them in without falling out, so you can get the brush plate back on the motor. And of course, like everything else, there's different ways to do it. That's just the way I tend to do it. Hopefully without the shooting the brush across the room. I'm going to add some oil to the wick here. And just a drop there. Let's see, clean this up a little bit. It's been a while. I do believe that you could pop this clip off and pull the armature out the other side, but I'm having enough trouble without going that far, so I'm just going to leave that in for now. It feels like it's moving pretty well. Don't forget this little clip. Spacer, spring, whatever you want to call it. I can go back in place. And I'm just going to throw some more grease on there. Hopefully E-unit is going to work. And that's where I'm going to stop for now, because I definitely do not have the patience for soldering. I wanted to check the function of the E-unit before I go ahead and complete the wiring. Let's see. All right, looks like the E-unit's working pretty well and the motor's spinning pretty well in both directions. So I guess I will feel comfortable going ahead and finishing up the wiring. I cleaned off the excess solder from the power point on the E-unit. Oh, there's still a lot of oil in there. That's not good. Guess I didn't really finish drying up the front truck. I'm going to clean some of this excess off of here. I think that's good enough. My soldering iron's gotten too hot for this stuff. That looks decent. Okay, so I'll feed the wire, which is obviously a bit too long, under the rear axle, the front truck, and then it can be screwed down. It's not a problem like that. It's not touching anything, but if you like, you can use a little bit of shrink tube. I don't think that's big enough. Nope, need a big one. It's got to be big enough to go over the tab, not just the wire. It doesn't have to be super tight or anything like that. You just want a little bit of protection, a little bit of added strength around the solder joint. You have the plastic on one side, and on this side, this washer. You have to make sure it's there, otherwise you can end up shorting it out. Because all the other metal on the truck is the ground, so we have to keep the power isolated. The wire can come up into the engine, and it would be great if I had already taken care of this mounting point. Originally, there was, I think, a riveted post on the top of the truck that came through, and then there was a little cert clip that snapped around it, but obviously that had broken. This is also added here. There was originally a little metal hook that sat there, so this thing obviously had some repairs. So for the time being, I'm just going to be careful, I hope. I obviously don't need this much wire. Gross overestimation on my part. I am going to keep it a little bit long. You want to get a little bit of solder on the wire. And you might be wondering, why is Dave soldering over a paper towel? And that is a fantastic question. Obviously, and there goes the front truck, obviously my brain is not working at peak performance. But Dave, your brain never works at peak performance. Yes, thank you very much. So I already tinned the wire a little bit. Solder it on there and find out. Yeah. And there goes the front truck again. This is going to be a problem. One thing to keep an eye on is when you're heating this up to solder this point, you got to make sure that the end of the coil doesn't come off the point on the other side. And it's still attached. For my sanity, I'm not going to mess with it at the moment because I'm probably going to rewire this whole thing again later anyway. That's all there is to run power from the pickup to the E-unit. It's just that one wire. It stopped in reverse direction well, so it's on its way back right now. That's not bad. That's running nice and smooth. For now, we're going to lock it in reverse. So the question then is, why did I lock it in reverse? Well, that's because it is the second A of the ABA set, and the other A of the ABA is the A, and that's locked it forward. I think I've read too much Dr. Seuss. Okay, so that works together nicely. They're not really fighting each other. So the question then is, why don't I just lock it in one direction and use it that way? Because right now, I can't back it up back into the frame again because they're both locked in one direction. And if you try to use separate E-units on two different engines at the same time, you run the risk of having them going opposite directions. My solution then is to wire them to run off of one E-unit when I'm running them as a set. But I also want to retain the E-unit in both A units so that I can run them individually. Now, the B unit adds a little bit of complication because now I have to run a wire through the B unit. None of this is really difficult. It's just, based on the wires and the connectors I have on hand, how can I make it work well? I don't care what the road name is. An ABA set of F3s is just impressive. I could go for an ABA set of pretty much any road name. The train was going around very nicely, and then this one stopped running. And I'm not sure why. Because it's running now. I think we have a short issue. Look at this. So it seems the front coupler is shorting. I can't think of why that would be shorting anything out, unless it's hitting the center rail. Let me put it back on the track and take a look. This is an instance where a little piece of electrical tape would be really handy. But, of course, I can't find my electrical tape. Just like I can't find the end of this packing tape. Ah, here it is. What's the tape for, you ask? Just double checking things. I'm thinking this is the problem right here. If you can see when the roller is pushed up and you push down on the coupler, it gets really close to the roller. This might be a little out of order because I had a whole bunch of video done and then I realized as I was editing that the microphone had shut off. Since I don't really remember where I left off, I had taken the E-unit apart, straightened all the fingers, cleaned it all up, put it back together, and it ran great. Except it started shorting out. And the short was happening right here. This clip was flipped around 180 degrees, and when the roller was compressed, it was close enough, not really touching, but close enough to bridge the gap and short it out. Now, I was running this and everything was great, and then it stopped working again. I know the motor works fine, so I'm obviously having some sort of issues with the E-unit. I took it out, I sprayed it down with contact cleaner, and it worked, and then it didn't. I think it's either a matter of the fingers being just too bent and not creating a good contact, or it's because the whole E-unit case seems to be a little loose. I think I have to fiddle around with the E-unit, either find one that works or rebuild one that works, put it back in here and make sure it's good before I go and try to connect all these engines together. This is kind of temporary because I kept picking up the engine and the front truck was falling off. So I took a pair of diagonal cutters and just very lightly put a ridge into the post, then snapped one of these clips around there, and it's enough at the moment to hold the truck on. So instead of drilling a hole in this or anything like that, if I do anything at this point, it will be to try to make that groove that I cut a little bit deeper so I can more securely attach the clip. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Dagryffyn Hobby.